Sometimes the greatest act of courage is choosing to trust a stranger when your world has fallen apart. Sometimes the deepest loneliness can only be healed by someone who understands what it means to be forgotten by the world. In the frozen wilderness of ancient Norway, a Viking warrior named Stig lives alone with his wolf dog, believing his fighting days are behind him. When he finds a young woman collapsed in the snow wearing a wedding dress, unable to move her legs, he makes a choice that changes everything. She won't say who she is or where she came from, only that she was running from a marriage she couldn't bear. As he cares for her through the long winter, strange things begin to happen around his cabin. But what Stig doesn't know is that his mysterious guest is hiding a dangerous secret about her past. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning mist clung to the ancient pines like the breath of sleeping giants, and Stig Ironson moved through it as silently as death itself. His boots, worn soft by countless miles of forest paths, made no sound on the carpet of fallen needles. Behind him, close enough to touch but invisible in the grey dawn, his wolf dog Fenris padded with the fluid grace of his wild ancestors. This was their ritual, this daily hunt that brought them deeper into the Norwegian wilderness than any man had reason to go. Here, where the trees grew so thick that noon felt like dusk, Stig had built his exile. Here, he told himself, the ghosts of burned villages could not follow. Above his simple hearth hung Grimnir's bite, the war axe that had once sung through the air in raids across the known world. Its blade, darkened by years of blood and battle, caught the firelight when he lit his evening fire. The runes carved into its handle spoke of protection and memory ironies that were not lost on him. Protection for a man who had brought destruction, memory for one who wished only to forget. The axe had not tasted blood in 3 winters now. 3 winters since Stig had walked away from the longships, from the brotherhood of raiders, from the life that had defined him since boyhood. 3 winters since he had seen what his hands could do to innocence and decided those hands would never again reach for Grimnir's bite in anger. Fenris lifted his massive head, ears pricked toward something Stig could not yet hear. The wolf dog's amber eyes held an intelligence that sometimes unsettled his master. In the old stories, such beasts were messengers of the gods, carrying wisdom between the world of men and the realm of spirits. Stig had never been one for the old stories, but living alone in the deep woods had a way of making a man reconsider what was possible. "What is it, old friend?" Stig's voice was rough from disuse. Some days, these words to Fenris were the only human speech that passed his lips. The wolf dog's response was a low whine, followed by a purposeful trot toward the northeast. Stig followed, his hand instinctively checking the CX at his belt, not Grimnir's bite, but a simple hunting knife. Old habits, he reminded himself. The forest held bears and wolves, but no enemies that required the weight of a war axe. They emerged into a clearing where the snow lay pristine and unmarked, except for a splash of color that should not have been there. Crimson silk, bright as fresh blood against the white, and beneath it the pale curve of a human hand. Stig's warrior instincts, dormant but never dead, flared to life. His eyes swept the tree line for signs of ambush, his ears strained for the sound of approaching footsteps. But there was only silence and the faint sound of weeping. She lay crumpled like a broken doll, this woman who had somehow found her way to the deepest part of his sanctuary. Her wedding dress, for that's what it was, Stig, realized with growing bewilderment, was torn and stained with dirt and blood. Dark hair spilled across the snow like spilled ink, and her face, turned toward him in unconscious appeal, was pale as birch bark. "Lady," he called softly, approaching with the same caution he would show a wounded animal. "Lady, can you hear me?" Her eyes opened green as summer leaves, startling in their clarity. For a moment they simply stared at each other, this exile and this mystery, while Fenris circled them both with protective intensity. "Don't," she whispered when Stig knelt beside her. "Don't take me back, please. Take you back where?" But even as he asked, Stig was making his assessment. Shallow breathing, skin cold, but not yet showing the grey of death. No visible wounds that would explain the blood on her dress. But when he touched her legs, checking for broken bones, she showed no reaction at all. "I can't feel them," she said, understanding his confusion. "My legs. I can't feel them. I can't move them. Something happened when I—" She stopped herself, fear flickering across her features. "When you what?" "When I ran. When I ran from the church, from the wedding. I just kept running, until the world went white, and then nothing. I woke up here." Stig's eyes traveled over her dress again, noting details he had missed in his initial shock. The silk was finer than anything he had seen outside a Jarl's hall. The embroidery was done with gold thread, and what he had taken for simple decoration revealed itself as family symbols, the kind worn by nobility. This was no village bride fleeing an unwanted marriage. This was someone important, someone whose disappearance would be noticed and pursued. "What's your name?" She hesitated so long that he thought she would not answer. "Elin," she said finally. "Just Elin. Just Elin, who wore gold in her hair and silk on her skin. Just Elin, who spoke with the careful pronunciation of court education." Stig had spent enough time in Jarl's halls during his raiding days to recognize nobility when he heard it, even when it was trying to disguise itself. "Well, just Elin," he said, sliding his arms beneath her to lift her from the snow. "You'll freeze to death if you stay here much longer. We can discuss the details of your flight from matrimony somewhere warmer." She was lighter than expected, and he found himself studying her face as he carried her toward his cabin. There was strength there, beneath the exhaustion and fear. This was not a woman who gave up easily, which made her current helplessness all the more troubling. What could make a person lose all feeling in their legs without any visible injury? The cabin that had been Stig's refuge for 3 years was not built for guests. 1 room, 1 bed, 1 chair by the fire. A table he had carved himself from oak, shelves for his few possessions, hooks for his hunting gear. Everything a man needed for survival, nothing more. Comfort, he had decided long ago, was for men who deserved it. He settled Elin on his bed, the only soft surface available, and began building up the fire. She watched him work with those unsettling green eyes, taking in every detail of his simple home. When her gaze fell on Grimnir's bite, mounted above the hearth like a shrine to violence, something shifted in her expression. "You're a warrior," she said. It was not a question. Was. Stig did not look up from the fire. "Now I'm just a man who lives in the woods. Warriors don't just stop being warriors. Some do." The flames caught, sending dancing shadows across the cabin walls. Some find reasons to stop. He could feel her studying him, this mysterious bride who had fallen into his solitary world like a stone dropped into still water. When he turned back to her, she was struggling to sit up against his rough-hewn headboard. "Thank you," she said simply, "for not leaving me there, for not asking questions I can't answer." "I haven't stopped asking questions. I've just decided to get you warm and fed before I insist on answers." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Fair enough. Stig prepared the only meal he knew how to make: rabbit stew with wild herbs, bread that was more dense than delicate. Army food, essentially, but it would keep her alive. As he worked, he found himself aware of her presence in a way that unsettled him. It had been so long since he had shared this space with another person that every sound seemed amplified. The rustle of fabric as she shifted position, the soft exhalation when she tried unsuccessfully to move her legs, the barely audible whisper of her fingers against the rough wool of his blankets. "How long since you've spoken to another person?" she asked, startling him from his thoughts. "Spoken to? A few months. The trapper comes through sometimes, trades news for meat." Stig ladled stew into a wooden bowl. "Spoken with?" "Much longer. What's the difference? Speaking to someone is just noise. Speaking with someone requires that you trust them enough to say something true. Elin accepted the bowl he offered, cradling it in both hands for warmth. What's the last true thing you said to someone? Stig considered this while serving his own portion. I told my crew leader I was done. Done with the raids, done with the killing, done with pretending that gold was worth the price we paid for it. What did he say? That I was a fool. That a man who walks away from his brothers for the sake of foreign civilians was no true Norse warrior. Was he right? Probably. But being a true Norse warrior was the problem. They ate in companionable silence, the only sounds, the crackling of the fire and Fenris settling himself by the door. The wolf dog had positioned himself where he could watch both the entrance and their guest, protective but wary. Animals, Stig had learned, were often better judges of character than men. Your dog, Elin said eventually. He's not entirely dog, is he? Wolf dog. Found him as a pup, mother killed by hunters. Probably more wolf than dog, if I'm honest. He's beautiful and intelligent. I can see it in his eyes. Fenris has been my only companion for 3 years. Sometimes I think he understands more than I give him credit for. Fenris, she tested the name. Like the wolf who will devour Odin at Ragnarok. You know the old stories. Some of them. Her voice carried a note of caution, as if she had revealed more than intended. The evening stretched on, filled with careful conversation that revealed little and suggested much. Elin spoke like someone educated in multiple languages, but claimed to remember little of her childhood. She knew the names of herbs and their medicinal uses, but could not explain where she had learned such things. Most telling of all, she seemed genuinely surprised by her own paralysis, as if the loss of feeling in her legs was as mysterious to her as it was to Stig. As the fire burned low, Stig prepared to make his bed on the floor, giving Elin the comfort of his simple mattress. But as he arranged his sleeping furs, she spoke again. Stig. Her voice was soft, almost lost in the settling sounds of the cabin. Whatever happens, whatever you learn about me, please remember that I never wanted to bring trouble to your door. What kind of trouble? The kind that follows people like me. What kind of person are you, Elin? The kind who should have died in that snow but didn't. The kind who can't explain why. Before Stig could respond, she had closed her eyes and turned away, effectively ending the conversation. But he lay awake long into the night, listening to her breathe and wondering what sort of storm he had invited into his carefully constructed peace. Outside, the wind picked up, howling through the trees with a voice like hunting wolves. And though he could not have said why, Stig found himself thinking of the old stories Elin had mentioned, tales of magic and destiny, of mortals who caught the attention of powers beyond their understanding. In the dying firelight, Grimnir's bite seemed to gleam with more than reflected flame, as if remembering the taste of battle. And Stig Ironson, who had walked away from war to find peace in the wilderness, began to suspect that war had followed him home at last. The third day brought the first thaw, and with it, troubling changes that Stig could no longer ignore. Elin had grown stronger in her upper body, able to sit upright for longer periods and feed herself without assistance. Her color had returned, replacing the deathly pallor with something approaching health, but her legs remained motionless, unresponsive to touch or command. And when she thought he wasn't watching, Stig caught her, staring at them with an expression that mixed fear with something deeper, guilt, perhaps, or recognition of a price willingly paid. "Tell me about the wedding," he said, as he prepared their morning meal. 3 days of careful politeness had yielded little information, and his patience was wearing thin. Elin's hands stilled on the wooden cup she had been warming between her palms. "What do you want to know? Start with why you ran." "I told you. I couldn't bear to marry him. That much I gathered. What I want to know is why a woman of obvious noble birth." He gestured toward the golden arm ring she wore, partially hidden beneath her torn sleeve, would choose to flee into a blizzard rather than simply refuse the match. Her fingers moved instinctively to cover the jewelry, but it was too late. The damage was done, and they both knew it. The arm ring was not something she could explain away as a family heirloom or servant's reward. It was heavy gold, intricately carved with symbols that spoke of wealth and power. Jarl's wealth, Jarl's power. "You wouldn't understand," she said finally. "Try me. I've seen enough of the world to understand that marriages among the nobility are rarely about love. This wasn't about love or politics or alliances." Elin's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. This was about something else entirely, something wrong. Before Stig could press for details, a sharp bark from Fenris cut through the morning air. The wolf dog was at the cabin's single window, hackles raised, staring into the forest with an intensity that made Stig's warrior instincts flare to life. "Someone's coming," he said, moving to the door. "Stay quiet." Through the trees, he could see them, 3 men on horseback, picking their way carefully along the game trail that led toward his cabin. They wore the leather and fur of professional hunters, but their horses were too fine, their weapons too well maintained. These were not trappers or traders. "Elin." His voice was sharp with urgency. "Those men, are they looking for you?" Her face had gone white again, but this time it was fear, not cold, that drained the color from her cheeks. "Hide. Me," she whispered. "Please, Stig. They can't find me here." "Why? What will they do?" "They'll take me back to him, to Jarl Bjorn. And if they do that, I'll never escape again." The name hit Stig like a physical blow. Jarl Bjorn the Cruel, whose reputation for brutality extended far beyond his own lands. Stig had heard stories, villages burned for sport, enemies tortured for days before being allowed to die, women who disappeared into his halls and were never seen again. "You were supposed to marry Bjorn?" "My father arranged it. A political alliance," he said. "But I met Bjorn before the wedding, and I saw." She shuddered. "I saw what he does to things he owns." The approaching riders were close enough now that Stig could hear their voices, calling to each other as they searched. One of them held something in his hand, a piece of fabric that might have been torn from a wedding dress. "Can you move at all?" Stig asked urgently. "My arms, my torso, but my legs—" "That's enough." He lifted her bodily from the bed, surprised again by how little she weighed. "There's a root cellar beneath the floor. It's meant for storing meat through the summer, but it will hide you." He showed her the concealed trapdoor near the back wall, helped her lower herself into the cramped space below. "Whatever happens, don't make a sound. And if something goes wrong, if they find you, remember that you chose to run once. You can choose to run again." Elin's hand caught his wrist as he prepared to close the trapdoor. "Stig, if they ask about a woman, don't lie to them. They'll know. Just don't volunteer anything they don't already know." "How will they know if I'm lying?" "Because Bjorn doesn't send ordinary men to hunt his prizes." Before Stig could ask what she meant by that, the sound of approaching hoofbeats forced him to close the trapdoor and arrange a fur rug over it. He had just enough time to settle himself by the fire, feigning the casual posture of a man, enjoying his morning meal when the riders arrived. The knock on his door was not polite. It was the kind of knock that expected immediate compliance, backed by the promise of force if cooperation was not forthcoming. "Open," a voice called. "In the name of Jarl Bjorn." Stig took his time rising, letting them wait long enough to establish that he was not a man who jumped at the sound of authority. When he finally opened the door, he found himself facing 3 men who confirmed his worst suspicions about Elin's situation. The leader was tall and lean, with the pale eyes and sharp features of the northern Jarls. His companions were clearly soldiers, but there was something else about them, a stillness that seemed unnatural, an alertness that went beyond human norm. Their eyes, when they looked at him, held a predatory intelligence that reminded him uncomfortably of Fenris, but without the wolf dog's warmth. "You live alone here?" the leader asked without preamble. I do. Seen anyone pass through in the last few days? A woman, perhaps, traveling alone? No women, Stig said truthfully. The last person I saw was a trapper, maybe a week ago. The pale-eyed man studied Stig's face with uncomfortable intensity. You're very calm for a man who's just been visited by armed strangers. I'm a long way from anywhere that matters. If you meant me harm, you'd have tried it already instead of asking polite questions. How do you know we mean you no harm? Because I have nothing worth taking, and killing me would accomplish nothing except making you murderers for no profit. Something that might have been amusement flickered across the leader's features. You speak like a man who understands violence. I understand that violence has a purpose. Random killing is just waste. Wise words. What's your name, hermit? Stig. Just Stig. Just Stig. The leader nodded slowly, as if filing the information away for future use. We're looking for someone who belongs to Jarl Bjorn, someone who left his protection without permission, someone who might be confused, injured, not thinking clearly. Sounds like you're looking for a runaway. Must be someone important, to send 3 riders into the deep woods in winter. Very important. And very dangerous. In her current state. If you were to encounter such a person, the wise thing would be to send word immediately to Jarl Bjorn. He's offering a substantial reward for information leading to her safe return. How substantial? Enough gold to buy yourself a better life than this. The leader gestured dismissively at Stig's humble cabin. I'll keep that in mind. For a moment, the 2 men stared at each other, and Stig felt a strange pressure behind his eyes, as if someone was trying to peer directly into his thoughts. He had experienced something similar once before, during a raid on a village whose wise woman was rumored to practice the old magic. The sensation was deeply unsettling, like fingers probing at the edges of his mind. Then Fenris growled, low and threatening, and the pressure disappeared. The leader's eyes flicked to the wolf dog with what might have been surprise. Interesting companion you have there. He doesn't like strangers. I can see that. The man stepped back, his hand moving casually to rest on his sword hilt. We'll be in the area for several more days. If your memory improves, or if you happen to encounter the person we're seeking, you can find us at the Thornwick village. I'll remember. After they left, Stig waited a full hour before opening the trapdoor. Elin emerged shaking, though whether from cold or fear, he could not tell. What did they want to know? She asked. Whether I'd seen a runaway woman. They offered gold for information. And I told them I hadn't seen any women. Stig helped her back to the bed, noting how her hands trembled as she arranged the blankets around her useless legs. But there's something you need to tell me, Elin. Those men weren't ordinary soldiers. No. They weren't. What were they? Bjorn collects useful people, warriors, hunters, trackers, and sometimes people who can do things that ordinary people can't do. What kind of things? Elin was quiet for so long that Stig thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. They can sense lies. They can follow trails that have nothing to do with footprints or broken branches. And their leader, the pale one, he can look into people's minds if they're not protected. Protected how? By will. By training. By... She stopped herself again. By magic? The word hung between them like a blade. In the 3 days since he had found her, Stig had carefully avoided thinking about the impossibilities surrounding Elin's condition. A healthy woman didn't simply lose the use of her legs without injury. Strange things didn't happen around ordinary people. And men who could peer into other men's thoughts belonged to stories, not reality. But reality, it seemed, was more flexible than he had believed. Yes, Elin said simply, by magic. The revelation of magic hung between them like morning mist, visible, undeniable, but difficult to grasp. Stig found himself studying Elin with new eyes, looking for signs of the otherworldly that he had missed in his concern for her physical condition. "Show me," he said finally. "What?" "This magic you speak of. If it's real, if it's the reason those men can track lies and peer into minds, then show me what you can do." Elin's laugh was bitter. "I can't do anything. That's the problem. Whatever happened when I fled the wedding, it took more than just the feeling in my legs." "Explain." She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the rough wool blanket. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of confession. "My mother was what the old women call vulva, a seeress, a worker of magic. She taught me the basic arts before she died. Nothing dramatic, nothing dangerous. How to sense the intentions of others, how to encourage plants to grow, how to ease pain with touch." "And your father allowed this?" "My father encouraged it. He said that in uncertain times, a Jarl's daughter should know every advantage available to her. But he made me promise to keep it secret. The church has made magic a dangerous thing to practice openly." Stig nodded. He had seen what happened to women accused of witchcraft, the stakes, the screaming, the smell of burning flesh. "So you learned in secret, until my mother died. Then I had only her books and my own fumbling attempts to understand them. I thought I was being careful, thought I was being wise. But when Bjorn," she shuddered, "when I met him I knew immediately that he was wrong, evil, in a way that goes beyond cruelty. So, on my wedding day, when he reached for me at the altar, I panicked. What did you do?" "I tried to break the bonds of the ceremony. There are old rituals, old words that can sever unwanted connections. But I was frightened, desperate. I spoke words I barely understood, drew on power I wasn't trained to control." As she spoke, Stig noticed something odd. The cup she held was steaming slightly, though the tea inside had been cold when he served it. "Elin," he said carefully, "look at your hands." She glanced down and gasped. The wooden cup was warm to the touch, far warmer than body heat could account for. As they watched, frost began forming on the window nearest to her, despite the fire burning steadily in the hearth. "I can't control it," she whispered. "It comes and goes without my will. Ever since that day, ever since I spoke those words." "What words?" "A breaking charm, meant to sever bonds of marriage or alliance, but I think I severed something else instead. Something inside myself." The frost on the window grew thicker, creating patterns that looked almost like runes. Fenris whined and moved closer to Stig, his fur standing on end. The wolf dog's amber eyes fixed on Elin with a mixture of fascination and unease. "The paralysis," Stig said, understanding beginning to dawn. "It's not an injury. It's part of whatever you broke inside yourself." "I think so. The power that should flow through my whole body is trapped, twisted. That's why my legs don't work, why strange things happen around me, why I can't control what little magic still responds to me." "And Bjorn knows this?" "Bjorn knows many things. He collects knowledge the way other men collect gold. If he wanted to marry me, it wasn't for political alliance, it was for my bloodline. My mother's gifts, passed down through generations of vulva." Stig rose and moved to the window, studying the frost patterns that continued to spread across the glass. They were definitely runes, though in a script older than any he recognized. "Can you read these?" Elin followed his gaze and her face went pale. "They're binding runes, but not any that I know. There," she reached toward the window, then pulled her hand back as if burned. "They're written in the old tongue, the language my mother used for the most serious workings." "What do they say?" "I'm not sure. Something about debt and payment, about prices willingly offered." She turned to Stig with eyes wide with fear. "I think the magic I used that day bound me to something. I think I made a bargain without realizing it." Before Stig could respond, the runes began to fade, dissolving like ice in warm water. Within moments, the window was clear again, leaving only their words hanging in the air like an unfinished sentence. That afternoon, Stig began teaching Elin what she could learn despite her condition. If they were going to be hunted, and he had no doubt that Bjorn's men would return, she needed to be more than a helpless burden. "Your arms are strong," he said, showing her how to use a walking stick for balance and leverage. "And your mind is clear. In some ways, that makes you more capable than many whole warriors I've known." "How can you say that? I can't even stand without falling." "Standing is just one way to fight. There are others." He demonstrated how she could brace herself against walls or furniture to free her hands for defense, how to use her upper body strength to pull herself quickly across different types of terrain. Most importantly, he taught her to think tactically, to see every room, every situation in terms of advantages and escape routes. "Why are you doing this?" she asked as they practiced. "Why help me learn to fight when you could simply turn me over to Bjorn's men and collect their reward?" Stig paused in his demonstration of knife grips. It was a fair question, and one he had been asking himself. 3 days ago, his greatest concern had been whether the winter stores would last until spring. Now he was preparing to oppose one of the most dangerous jarls in Norway, for the sake of a woman whose very presence had filled his simple life with magic and mystery. "Do you know why I left the raiding life?" he asked instead of answering directly. "You mentioned innocent villages, children killed, guilt over the violence. More specific than that, there was a settlement, maybe 2 days' sail from here, small, peaceful. They raised sheep and grew barley, traded wool for the things they couldn't make themselves. No warriors to speak of, no treasure worth the effort of a raid." Stig set down the practice knife and moved to the fire, staring into the flames as if seeing the past there. "But our Jarl wanted to make an example, wanted to show the coastal villages what happened to those who didn't pay tribute, so we burned them out. And that changed you? There was a girl, maybe 12 years old, hidden in the root cellar when we fired the houses. She came running out, dress ablaze, screaming for her mother." His voice dropped to barely above, a whisper. "I could have saved her, could have thrown my cloak over the flames, carried her to safety. Instead, I stood and watched because those were my orders. Because being a good raider meant following orders, even when they led to atrocity. But you left afterward. I left, but too late. Too late for her, too late for the dozen other settlements we had burned before I found my conscience." He turned back to Elin, and she saw something in his eyes that made her understand. "I can't undo what I did, but I can choose differently now. I can choose to protect instead of destroy. Even if it costs you everything? What do I have to lose? A life of solitude and regret? A peaceful exile built on the bones of innocence?" Stig picked up the practice knife again. "If Bjorn's men come back, they won't find a helpless refugee and a guilt-ridden hermit. They'll find 2 people who know exactly what they're fighting for." That evening, as they shared another simple meal, Elin surprised at him by reaching into her torn wedding dress and withdrawing a small object wrapped in silk. When she unwrapped it, Stig saw a piece of carved stone covered in runes, not the frost runes that had appeared on the window, but something older and more deliberately crafted. "What is it?" "A binding stone, one of my mother's tools. I kept it hidden, even from my father." She held it carefully, reverently. "It's designed to hold magical energy, to store it for times when it's needed. Is that how you'll fix yourself? With stored magic? Maybe, or maybe it will help me understand what I actually did wrong that day." Elin wrapped the stone again, holding it close. "My mother used to say that magic always demands a price, but she also said that sometimes, if you're very careful and very wise, you can negotiate better terms." Outside, the wind was picking up again, carrying with it the promise of more snow. But inside the cabin, warmed by fire, and the growing trust between 2 damaged souls, the future seemed less bleak than it had just days before. The acceptance came gradually, like winter giving way to spring. Stig found himself adjusting to the reality of magic, the way he had once adjusted to the weight of armor, at first strange and cumbersome, then simply another tool to understand and master. Elin's condition, he learned, was more complex than simple paralysis. Her legs weren't dead, they were disconnected, as if the pathways between her mind and her lower body had been severed by whatever spell she had cast in desperation. Sometimes, when she was deeply asleep, he would see her toes twitch or her knee jerk in response to dreams. The body remembered what the conscious mind could no longer command. "It's like trying to speak a language you've forgotten," she explained, as they worked through her daily exercises. "I know the words should be there, but when I reach for them, there's only silence." "Languages can be relearned," Stig pointed out, helping her stretch muscles that could no longer feel his touch. "Not all of them. Some things, once broken, can't be repaired, only replaced with something new." It was during one of these sessions that Fenris first revealed the true extent of his nature. The wolf dog had been restless all morning, pacing from window to door with an anxiety that put Stig's nerves on edge. When strangers were approaching, Fenris would growl. When game was near, he would whine softly and point with his nose. This was different, an agitation that seemed to have no external cause. Elin was practicing with the walking stick, trying to pull herself upright using the furniture for support, when she lost her balance and began to fall. Stig moved to catch her, but Fenris was faster. The wolf dog lunged forward, not to intercept her fall, but to "Stop," Fenris said. The word hung in the air like a bell's toll. Elin froze mid-fall, suspended for a moment in impossible balance before settling gently back into her chair. Stig stared at his companion of 3 years, the animal he had raised from an orphaned pup, the beast who had never spoken a word until this moment. "Fenris?" Stig's voice came out as barely a whisper. The wolf dog turned amber eyes toward him, and in those depths, Stig saw intelligence far beyond anything animal. "I could not let her be hurt," Fenris said, his voice carrying the rough quality of one unused to human speech. "Not when she is so close to understanding." "Understanding what?" Elin asked, seemingly less surprised by the talking animal than Stig was. "What you truly bound yourself to when you spoke the breaking words. What debt you incurred, and why the payment has been delayed." Stig sank into his chair, his worldview rearranging itself around this new impossibility. "How long have you been able to speak?" "Always. But speaking to humans is forbidden unless there is great need." Fenris padded closer, his massive head level with Stig's shoulder. "I am what the old ones called a guardian spirit, bound to watch over those who carry the old blood." "The old blood?" "The lines of magic that run back to the first people, before the new gods came with their rules and their fears. Elin carries such blood, as did her mother, and her mother's mother before her." Elin leaned forward, her eyes bright with sudden hope. "Then you know what I did wrong. You know how to fix it?" "I know what you did," Fenris said carefully. "Whether it can be fixed depends on choices yet to be made." "Tell me." Fenris settled himself at their feet, assuming the formal posture of a storyteller. "When you spoke the breaking words at your wedding, you were not simply trying to sever the bonds of marriage. You were trying to break free from a trap that had been set long before you arrived at the altar." "What kind of trap?" "Jarl Bjorn is more than a cruel ruler. He's what we call a blood drinker, one who feeds on the life force of others to extend his own power and longevity. Your father did not arrange a marriage, he arranged a sacrifice." The words hit Elin like physical blows. "My father he couldn't have known. Your father knew exactly what Bjorn was," Fenris said gently. "But he was given a choice. Offer his daughter willingly, or watch his entire clan be destroyed. He chose what he believed was the lesser evil. So I was right to run. You were right to run. But the breaking spell you used was not designed to sever marriage bonds. It was a death curse, meant to destroy the connection between predator and prey. When you cast it, you offered your own life as payment to prevent Bjorn from claiming you." Stig felt his blood run cold. Offered her life to whom? To the old powers that govern such bargains, the same powers that sent me to watch over her bloodline. Fenris's amber eyes fixed on Ellen. You are not paralyzed because the spell went wrong. You are paralyzed because you are dying slowly, gracefully, but certainly, unless the debt is paid in some other way. How long do I have? Ellen's voice was steady, but Stig could see her hands trembling. Perhaps a season, perhaps less, if Bjorn finds a way to accelerate the process. And if the debt is paid some other way, then you would be free to live, to love, to use your magic as it was meant to be used. But the payment must be willingly offered, and it must be of equal value to what was promised. Stig rose abruptly, pacing to the window where he stared out at the snow-covered forest. 3 days ago, his greatest concern had been whether to repair the roof before spring. Now he was learning that the woman he had sheltered was under a supernatural death sentence, being hunted by a blood-drinking Jarl who wanted to claim her life force for his own dark purposes. What constitutes equal payment? He asked without turning around. A life freely given for a life freely saved. But it must be someone whose death would mean as much to the old powers as Elin's would. Someone with magic blood, or someone whose actions have shaped the flow of fate in significant ways. Stig turned back to face them, and Ellen saw in his expression what he was thinking. No, she said sharply. Absolutely not. It makes sense, Stig said calmly. I'm responsible for dozens of deaths, maybe hundreds. The old powers would probably consider my life a bargain at any price. You're not responsible for this. You didn't ask for any of it. Neither did you. But you're facing death because you chose to run rather than submit to a monster. That's exactly the kind of choice I wish I had made when it mattered. Fenris watched this exchange with the patience of one who had seen many such conversations over the centuries. There may be other options, he said eventually, but they would require knowledge that has been lost for generations, knowledge that might still exist in the old places, where the first practitioners stored their practice. Deepest secrets. What old places? Elin asked. The settlement that was destroyed when your mother was young. The place where the greatest vulva of the age had her sanctuary. It lies 3 days' journey from here, in the deep mountains where few men dare to travel. And you think there might be answers there? I think there might be choices there. Different ways to balance the scales, different prices that might be paid. Fenris rose and moved to the door, his head tilted as if listening to something only he could hear. But we should decide quickly. Bjorn's men are returning, and this time they bring reinforcements. Through the cabin's single window, Stig could see nothing but empty forest. But Fenris's senses were far keener than human perception, and if he said danger was approaching, then danger it was. How many? Stig asked, already moving toward his weapons. 12 men. And something else. Something that smells of old magic and fresh blood. Bjorn himself? Perhaps, or perhaps he has sent something worse. Ellen struggled to pull herself upright, her face set with determination. We have to leave. Now. If they find us here, if they take me back, they won't, Stig said, lifting her easily in his arms. Fenris, how long do we have? Perhaps an hour, perhaps less. Then we travel light and we travel fast. Stig looked down at Elin, seeing in her green eyes the same fear he had witnessed when he first found her in the snow. But there was something else there now, trust, and the beginning of something that might, given time, become love. Where are we going? She asked. To find answers, he said, carrying her toward the door, and to discover what price we're willing to pay for freedom. The journey into the deep mountains began with desperation and evolved into something approaching pilgrimage. Stig had fashioned a crude but effective sledge from pine branches and leather, allowing him to pull Elin across the snow, while Fenris ranged ahead, his supernatural senses alert for both natural dangers and magical threats. They traveled by night when possible, following game trails and stream beds that would hide their passage from ordinary trackers. But as Fenris had warned, their pursuers were not ordinary, and more than once they were forced to take shelter in caves or dense thickets, while dark shapes passed overhead, shapes that moved with too much purpose to be natural birds. "What are those things?" Elin whispered during one such hiding, pressing herself against the rocky wall of a shallow cave, while something with wings larger than an eagle circled above. "Ravens," Fenris said quietly, "but not the kind that serve the All-Father. These belong to Bjorn, and they see with his eyes." The artifact that guided their way was something Stig had carried for years, without understanding its true nature. The Pathfinder's compass had belonged to his grandfather, a grizzled warrior who claimed it had saved his life, more times than he could count. Unlike an ordinary compass, its needle didn't point north, it pointed toward whatever the bearer most needed to find. "My grandfather always said it would lead me to my destiny," Stig murmured, as they paused to check their direction. "I never imagined my destiny would involve fleeing through a blizzard with a cursed vulva and a talking wolf." "Destiny rarely takes the shape we expect," Elin replied. She had grown stronger during their flight, not physically but in spirit. The helpless woman he had found in the snow was being replaced by someone harder, more determined. "But it always takes the shape we need." The compass led them higher into the mountains, through passes so narrow that snow fell almost constantly from the peaks above. The cold was brutal, made worse by winds that seemed to carry voices, whispers in languages that Stig didn't recognize, but that made Elin's eyes go wide with recognition and fear. "What are they saying?" he asked, as they struggled through a particularly treacherous section of trail. "Old words, warning words. They're telling us to turn back, that the path ahead leads only to sorrow and death." "Whose voices?" "The spirits of those who died here. This is a place of power, Stig. A place where the boundary between worlds grows thin. The dead linger here because they can't let go of what they lost." Despite the warnings, they pressed on. There was no choice. Behind them lay certain capture, and ahead lay at least the possibility of answers. But the higher they climbed, the stranger the world around them became. Trees grew in impossible spirals, their branches reaching toward the earth instead of the sky. Snow fell upward in some places, and more than once Stig caught glimpses of structures that weren't quite there, buildings that existed only in the corner of his vision, vanishing when he turned to look directly at them. "We're getting close," Fenris announced on their second day of climbing. "I can smell the old magic. It's stronger here than anywhere I've been in centuries." "Stronger how?" Stig asked. "Raw, uncontrolled. Whatever happened to the settlement we're seeking, it released a great deal of power all at once. That power is still here, still looking for somewhere to go." They found the ruins just as the sun was setting on their third day of travel. What had once been a thriving community of magical practitioners was now a collection of broken stones and charred timber, scattered across a high plateau like the remnants of a giant's tantrum. But even in destruction, the place radiated power. The very air seemed to hum with potential, and Elin gasped as they entered the outer edges of the settlement. "I can feel them," she whispered. "All of them. The vulva who lived here, the students who came to learn, the children who played in these ruins when they were still homes. Feel them how? Their memories, their knowledge. It's all still here, preserved in the goo, stones and the earth." She reached toward a broken wall with trembling fingers. When this place was destroyed, the magic didn't die with it. It soaked into everything, waiting for someone who could understand it. Stig helped her down from the sledge, and together they began exploring the ruins. Most of the buildings had been reduced to foundations and scattered stones. But near the center of the settlement, they found something intact, a circular structure built from black stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "That's where we need to go," Elin said, staring at the building with a mixture of longing and fear. "That's where the answers are. And the dangers? Those too." The interior of the stone building was larger than its exterior suggested. a phenomenon that Stig was beginning to accept as simply another impossibility in a world that had revealed itself to be far stranger than he had ever imagined. Carved into the walls were thousands of runes, layer upon layer of magical writing that seemed to shift and change when viewed from different angles. At the center of the chamber stood a pedestal, holding an object that made both Elin and Fenris draw back in surprise. A staff carved from white ash wood, its surface covered in silver inlay that formed patterns too complex for the eye to follow completely. The wise woman's Saedra staff, Elin breathed. I thought it was lost when the settlement was destroyed. Not lost, Fenris corrected. Hidden, waiting for someone worthy to claim it. How do you know I'm worthy? Because it called to you, because your mother's spirit guided us here, through dreams and signs that you were too distracted to notice. As if drawn by invisible threads, Elin pulled herself toward the staff, using the stone pedestals and carved handholds that lined the chamber walls. When her fingers closed around the ancient wood, the entire building seemed to exhale, and suddenly the runes on the walls blazed with silver light. "What's happening?" Stig asked, his hand moving instinctively to his weapon. "Knowledge," Elin said, her voice taking on a strange, multi-layered quality, as if other voices were speaking through her. "Understanding. The staff is showing me what really happened here, what my mother learned before she died, what prices were paid, and what debts remain." Images began forming in the silver light scenes of the settlement's destruction, but not by raiders or war. The Volva who had lived here had attempted something unprecedented, a working of magic so powerful that it had torn holes in the fabric of reality itself. They were trying to protect their knowledge, Elin continued, her eyes now glowing with the same silver light as the runes. When they saw that the new religion would destroy everything they had built, they tried to preserve it by binding it to the very stones and earth. But the working required a sacrifice not just of life, but of connection to the mortal world. What kind of sacrifice? The greatest Volva of the age willingly severed her connection to life, becoming something between spirit and flesh. She and her knowledge became part of this place, waiting for someone who could carry on the tradition. Stig felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain cold. "And that someone is you?" "That someone could be me," Elin corrected, "if I'm willing to pay the price." "What price?" The silver light pulsed, and for a moment Stig could see another figure in the chamber, a tall woman with Elin's eyes and hair, dressed in robes that seemed to be woven from starlight itself. "To claim the full knowledge of this place," the apparition said in a voice like wind through winter trees, "one must be willing to become its guardian. To bind oneself to this place as I did, neither fully alive nor fully dead, but something new." "No," Stig said immediately. "There has to be another way. There are always other ways. The spirit." "Agreed, but they require different sacrifices, different prices. The question is, what are you willing to lose to save what you love?" The apparition faded, leaving them alone with the glowing staff and the weight of impossible choices. Outside, the wind howled through the ruins with a voice like hunting wolves, and somewhere in the distance, Stig thought he could hear the sound of approaching hoofbeats. The knowledge that flowed from the Saedra staff came in waves, each surge bringing revelations that left Elin gasping with the intensity of understanding. Stig watched helplessly as she absorbed centuries of magical learning in moments, her body rigid with the effort of containing so much information. "The curse can be broken," she said finally, her voice hoarse from strain, "but not in the way we hoped." "Explain." "The death debt I incurred when I cast the breaking spell, it's not just about my life. It's about the magical potential I carry, the bloodline I represent. Bjorn doesn't just want to drain my life force. He wants to corrupt the very source of Volva magic, to turn healing power into something destructive." Fenris padded closer, his amber eyes reflecting the silver light that still emanated from the staff. "And if he succeeds?" Then every woman born with the old blood becomes vulnerable to his influence. Every healer becomes a potential weapon. Every wise woman becomes a tool of his will. Elin's grip on the staff tightened. My mother knew this was coming. That's why she taught me in secret, why she hid so much of her knowledge, even from my father. She was preparing you for this moment, Stig realized. She was preparing me to make a choice. The same choice the vulva of this settlement made when they saw their world-ending sacrifice, individual freedom, to preserve something greater. The chamber around them seemed to pulse with agreement, the carved runes shifting to form new patterns that spoke of ancient responsibilities and eternal vigils. But as Elin studied the magical texts written in light across the walls, her expression grew troubled. "There's something else," she said. "Something the staff shows me about my father's death." "What about it?" "He wasn't poisoned by Bjorn. He was killed by the same curse that's killing me now." Elin's voice broke slightly. "When I cast the breaking spell, I didn't just sever my connection to Bjorn, I severed every family bond. My father died because I unknowingly included him in the death debt." The revelation hit her like a physical blow, and for a moment the silver light flickered as her concentration wavered. Stig moved to support her, but she waved him away, forcing herself to maintain contact with the staff despite the emotional cost. "Show me everything," she demanded of the ancient magic. "Show me all the prices, all the consequences, all the choices available." The light intensified, and suddenly the chamber was filled with visions, possible futures, spinning out like threads on a cosmic loom. In some, Elin became the eternal guardian of the settlement, her body preserved, but her spirit bound to the mountain forever. In others, she allowed the death curse to run its course, dying to save others from Bjorn's influence, but leaving the world defenseless against future threats. But there was a third path, darker and more dangerous than the others. Elin could accept the full power of the ancient vulva, becoming something more than human but retaining her freedom. The price would be paid not by her, but by everyone she had ever loved. Their life forces would be drained to fuel her transformation, leaving her powerful but utterly alone. "No," Stig said, somehow sensing the direction of her thoughts. "Whatever you're considering, the answer is no. You don't understand the implications. I understand that you're looking for a way to sacrifice everyone else to save yourself. That's exactly the kind of thinking that made me into a monster during my raiding days. This is different. This is about preventing something worse. It's about choosing who lives and who dies based on your judgment of their value. I've been down that path, Elin. It doesn't lead anywhere you want to go." Their argument was interrupted by Fenris, who had moved to the chamber's entrance and was growling low in his throat. "They've found us," he said. "Bjorn's forces have reached the settlement." Through the entrance, Stig could see torches moving among the ruins, not the steady advance of ordinary soldiers, but the erratic dance of creatures that moved by instinct rather than training. Mixed with the torchlight were other sources of illumination, cold blue flames that cast no warmth and the sickly green glow of corrupted magic. "How many?" Stig asked, checking his weapons. "More than we can fight directly, but they're being cautious. The old magic of this place makes them uneasy. Good. Fear is something we can use." Elin was still connected to the staff, her consciousness split between the chamber and the mystical visions it provided. "There's another way," she said suddenly, "a fourth path that the staff shows me, but it requires—" Her words were cut off as something struck the chamber's walls with tremendous force. The black stone held, but dust rained from the ceiling and several of the carved runes flickered. "What was that?" Stig demanded. "Bjorn himself," Fenris replied grimly, "and he's not alone. I can smell the corruption on him. He's been using blood magic to enhance his strength." Another impact, stronger this time. Cracks appeared in the stone walls, and through them seeped a red light that pulsed like a heartbeat. Whatever Bjorn was doing to break through their sanctuary, it was working. "The fourth path," Stig said urgently to Elin. "What does it require?" "A willing exchange. Someone must take on the death curse in my place, but not just anyone, someone whose life force is already intertwined with mine. Someone you love. Someone who loves me enough to make that choice freely, knowing all the consequences. Stig felt something settle into place in his chest, a certainty that was both terrifying and liberating. What would happen to you? I would be free of the curse, free to use my magic as it was meant to be used. But I would also be bound to whoever took my place. Their fate would become mine, their death would trigger my own. And what would happen to the person who took the curse? They would have perhaps a year before the death debt claimed them. But during that time, they would share in my magical abilities. They would become something more than human, capable of feats no ordinary warrior could achieve. Another impact shook the chamber, and this time chunks of stone fell from the ceiling. The entrance was beginning to glow with that sickly red light, and Stig could hear voices chanting in a language that made his skin crawl. "There's no time for a long discussion," he said. "If this exchange could give us the power to stop Bjorn permanently, it could. But Stig, you have to understand what you'd be agreeing to. A year of shared power, followed by death. And not just death, the kind of spiritual dissolution that the death curse brings. No afterlife, no journey to the halls of the gods. Just ending. I've been dead inside for 3 years, Stig replied. Ever since I watched that village burn and did nothing to stop it. If I can use the time I have left to prevent others from suffering the same fate, then it's a bargain I'm willing to make. And if I refuse to let you, then we all die here and Bjorn wins. Your choice, Völva. Save yourself by damning me, or watch everything burn because you couldn't accept help." The chamber door exploded inward in a shower of stone and dark fire. Through the smoking gap came creatures that had once been men, Bjorn's soldiers, transformed by blood magic, into something that was neither living nor dead. Behind them strode Jarl Bjorn himself, his pale eyes blazing with power stolen from a dozen victims. "My dear bride," he called in a voice like grinding stone, "it's time to come home." Ellin's hand tightened on the staff, and she looked at Stig with eyes that held both love and desperation. "Do you consent to this exchange, knowing all that it means?" "I consent. Then take my hand, and let's discover what we can accomplish together." As their fingers touched, the silver light of the staff exploded outward, washing over the chamber in a wave of pure magical force. And in that moment of connection, Stig felt the death curse flow from Ellin into himself, along with power beyond anything he had ever imagined. The transformation was instantaneous and overwhelming. As the death curse flowed from Elin into Stig, it brought with it not just the burden of mortality, but a connection to magical forces that rewrote his understanding of reality itself. Power coursed through his veins like liquid fire, and suddenly he could see the world as Ellin did, layered with energies invisible to ordinary sight, alive with possibilities that mundane perception could never grasp. But the most shocking revelation came not from the magic itself, but from what it revealed about Jarl Bjorn. By the gods, Stig breathed, his enhanced vision piercing through the illusions that had concealed Bjorn's true nature. He's already dead. Where a living man should have stood was something else entirely, a walking corpse animated by stolen life force, held together by blood magic and an implacable will. Bjorn had been dead for years, perhaps decades, sustaining his existence by draining others. The pale skin wasn't just the coloring of the northern Jarls, it was the grey pallor of death itself, given false life through constant feeding. "Now you see," Elin said, her own voice stronger now that the death curse no longer drained her. "Strength. Why ordinary weapons cannot touch him, why ordinary men cannot stand against him. He's beyond such things." Bjorn's corpse soldiers advanced into the chamber, their movements jerky and unnatural. Up close, Stig could see that they too were dead warriors who had fallen in Bjorn's service and been raised again to continue fighting. Their eyes held no intelligence, only hunger, and when they opened their mouths to roar challenges, black blood poured out instead of words. "The living cannot harm the dead," Bjorn said, his voice echoing strangely in the confined space. "But the dead can certainly harm the living. My bride will come with me willingly, or I will add her new protector to my collection." "I'm no longer your bride," Elin replied, rising from her position with fluid grace. The paralysis that had plagued her was completely gone, replaced by a vitality that seemed to radiate from her very bones. "And you are no longer welcome in the realm of the living. The realm of the living rejected me long ago, girl. I have made my own realm, where I am both king and god." Stig drew his sword, feeling the magic that now flowed through him respond to his will. The blade blazed with silver light, and where that light touched the advancing corpse soldiers, they recoiled as if burned. "Interesting," Bjorn mused. "The death curse has been transferred, I see. How very clever. But do you truly understand what you have accepted, warrior? The price is not just your life, it is your eternal soul." "What do you mean?" Stig asked, though part of him already dreaded the answer. "The death curse doesn't simply kill, it consumes. When it claims you, there will be nothing left, no spirit to journey to the halls of heroes, no essence to join your ancestors. You will simply cease, as if you had never existed at all." Elin's face went white with horror. "The staff didn't show me that part. It couldn't have. I would never have asked you to. You didn't ask." Stig reminded her, parrying a clumsy strike from one of the corpse soldiers. "I chose, and I choose again, knowing the full price." "How noble," Bjorn sneered. "How utterly pointless. Because you see, my dear dead bride, I need not claim you for marriage now. I need only wait for the curse to claim your protector, and then you will be alone again, weak, friendless, and ripe for the taking. Unless we stop you first." "With what? Your pretty light show? Your righteous anger?" Bjorn gestured, and more corpse soldiers poured into the chamber, not just warriors now, but twisted things that had once been women and children, their innocent faces corrupted by the dark magic that animated them. "I have had decades to build my power, girl. You have had minutes." But as the undead forces closed in, something unexpected happened. The chamber itself began to respond to the magical energies being unleashed within it. The carved runes flared to life, not with the silver light of Elin's staff, but with a deep golden radiance that seemed to come from the very stones. "The settlement's guardians," Elin breathed. "They're awakening." From the walls themselves stepped figures of light, the spirits of the Volva who had died here centuries ago, their forms translucent but unmistakably present. At their head walked the ancient wise woman whose staff Elin now carried, her starlight robes flowing like liquid moonbeams. "Bjorn Corpse King," the spirit said, her voice carrying the authority of ages, "you have trespassed upon sacred ground." "Sacred to whom?" Bjorn snarled. "Your gods are dead, old woman. Your power is dust and memory. Our power is eternal because it serves life rather than consuming it. You have forgotten this truth in your hunger for immortality." The spirit Volva raised her hands, and suddenly every corpse soldier in the chamber began to convulse. Whatever force animated them was being challenged by something stronger. The combined will of every wise woman who had ever lived and died in service to the old powers. "Impossible," Bjorn whispered, and for the first time since entering the chamber, he showed genuine fear. "The dead cannot command the dead." "We are not dead," another spirit voice replied. "We are transformed, and transformation, unlike death, can be shared with those we choose to aid." Elin felt it first, a warmth spreading through the staff and into her hands, then up her arms and throughout her entire body. It was not just power, but knowledge, understanding, the accumulated wisdom of generations of magical practitioners flowing into her consciousness. Stig experienced something similar but different. His sword blazed brighter as the spirits recognized him as a protector worthy of their aid. Where before the weapon had simply glowed with transferred magic, now it sang with purpose. its edge sharp enough to cut through the barriers between life and death. "You see, Corpse King, the ancient wise woman," it continued, "you made a fundamental error in your pursuit of immortality. You sought to preserve yourself by consuming others. But true immortality comes from giving of yourself, from becoming part of something larger and more enduring than any individual existence." Bjorn's form began to waver as the spirit Volva's power pressed against the dark magic that sustained him. "This changes nothing," he snarled. "Even if you drive me from this place, I will return. I will find other ways to claim what belongs to me." "Nothing belongs to you," Elin said, stepping forward with the staff blazing in her hands. "You are a thief and a parasite, feeding on others because you lack the strength to sustain yourself honestly. And what are you, girl? What right do you have to judge me? I am what you could never be, someone willing to sacrifice for others rather than sacrificing others for myself." The confrontation between them was building toward something momentous when Fenris, who had been strangely quiet during the exchange, suddenly spoke. "There is something you both need to know," the wolf spirit said. "Something about the true nature of this curse, and why Bjorn is so desperate to claim Elin specifically." "Speak," the ancient wise woman commanded. "Elin is not just any Volva bloodline. She is the last direct descendant of the first woman to make a bargain with the old powers, the one who traded her mortal nature for the ability to protect others through magic. The death curse she triggered was not random. It was the culmination of a pact made 1,000 years ago." "What kind of pact?" Stig demanded. "That when the world grew dark enough, when the forces of consumption and destruction grew too strong, the bloodline would produce a champion capable of restoring the balance. But that champion would have to choose freely to accept the ultimate sacrifice, not death, but transformation into something beyond mortal comprehension." Elin stared at the wolf spirit in shock. "You're saying this was always meant to happen? That my mother, my grandmother, all of them were just preparation?" Fenris confirmed. "Leading to this moment, this choice, this opportunity to save not just your world, but all the worlds connected to it." Bjorn laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Do you hear this nonsense, girl? Destiny, prophecy, cosmic purpose, all lies designed to make you accept your slavery willingly. I offer you real power, real freedom. Join with me, and you will rule beside me forever." "Ruling over what?" Elin asked. "A world of corpses and darkness? A realm where nothing grows and nothing lives? A world where you never have to fear, never have to doubt, never have to die? A world where I would no longer be myself?" The chamber filled with tension as the two paths diverged clearly before them. Bjorn's offer of corrupted immortality, or the ancient pact that would transform Elin into something entirely new. But as she prepared to make her choice, Stig stepped beside her. "Whatever you decide," he said quietly, "you won't face it alone. The curse has bound us together now. Your fate is mine, and mine is yours." Elin looked at him with eyes that held both love and infinite sadness. "Even if my fate is to become something no longer human? Even if accepting this transformation means I can never love you the way a mortal woman loves a mortal man? Then we'll discover together what kind of love exists beyond mortality." As their hands joined around the staff, the chamber erupted in light that was neither silver nor gold, but something entirely new, the radiance of choice freely made, of sacrifice willingly offered, of love that transcended the boundaries between life and death. And in that light, both Bjorn and his corpse soldiers began to scream. The light that erupted from their joined hands was more than illumination. It was revelation itself, burning away illusions and forcing truth into the open. Bjorn's corpse soldiers dissolved like morning mist, their stolen animation unable to withstand the combined power of love freely given and destiny freely accepted. But Bjorn himself merely staggered backward, his form flickering between the handsome Jarl he pretended to be and the withered corpse he truly was. "Clever children," He snarled, his voice distorting as the magical disguise failed. "But you have only won a single battle, not the war. Do you think I came here alone? Do you think I staked everything on this one encounter?" Through the shattered entrance to the chamber came sounds that confirmed Stig's worst fears: the clash of weapons, the screams of the dying, the crackle of unnatural fire. Whatever forces Bjorn had brought to the mountain were attacking more than just their refuge. "The villages," Aelin breathed, her enhanced senses picking up details that ordinary perception would miss. "He's attacking the settlements below, everyone who lives within a day's ride of this place." "Insurance," Bjorn confirmed with a corpse's grin. "If I cannot claim my bride willingly, then I will simply take enough life force to sustain myself for another century. Thousands of innocents will die tonight because of your stubborn refusal to accept your proper role." The artifact that had guided them here, the Pathfinder's compass, began spinning wildly in Stig's pack, its needle pointing in multiple directions at once, as if trying to indicate every location where help was desperately needed. The scope of Bjorn's assault was becoming clear. This was not just an attempt to reclaim Aelin, but a wholesale slaughter designed to feed his unnatural existence. "We have to stop this," Stig said, his voice tight with the same helpless fury he had felt watching that village burn years ago. "We will," Aelin replied, but her eyes held a sadness that spoke of understanding costs not yet shared. "But first, I need to complete the transformation that the ancient pact requires. And you need to understand what that truly means." The spirit Vulva, who had spoken before, stepped forward, her starlight robes rustling like wind through leaves. Around her, the other ancient spirits formed a circle, their combined presence filling the chamber with power that made the air itself hum with potential. "The transformation is not just magical," the wise woman explained. "It is fundamental. To become what this world needs, Aelin must surrender not just her human form, but her human limitations. She will become a force of nature itself, eternal, powerful, but bound by laws older than civilization." "What kind of laws?" Stig asked. "She cannot act directly against free will. She cannot force people to choose good over evil, love over hate, life over death. She can only offer opportunities, provide aid to those who seek it, and stand as a guardian against forces that would corrupt the natural order. And me," Stig's hand moved to his chest, where he could feel the death curse burning like a coal near his heart. "What becomes of me in this transformation?" "You become her anchor," another spirit replied. "The connection that keeps her tethered to the world of mortals ensures that she remembers what it means to be human." "But the price—" "I know the price," Stig interrupted. "1 year of shared power, then dissolution. But what you haven't told us is whether that year will be enough to stop Bjorn permanently." The spirits exchanged glances that spoke of knowledge they wished they didn't possess. "Bjorn is more than a simple corpse king," the ancient wise woman said finally. "He has become something that exists partially outside the natural order. Killing his body will not destroy him. He will simply find another form, another way to continue his predation." "Then how do we stop him?" "By healing the wound in reality that allowed him to exist in the first place. By repairing the damage that his centuries of life theft have done to the damage. Balance between worlds." Aelin's grip on the staff tightened. "That's what the transformation is really for, isn't it? Not just to oppose Bjorn, but to fix what he's broken." "Yes, but the cost of such healing will be everything I am and everything I might have been." Aelin turned to Stig with eyes that held infinite love and infinite regret. "I'm sorry. If I had known when we first met what accepting your help would lead to, you would have done exactly the same thing," Stig said firmly. "Because that's who you are. Someone who chooses to protect others, even when the cost is terrible." Outside the chamber, the sounds of destruction were growing closer. Bjorn's forces were not just attacking the distant villages, they were closing in on the settlement itself, drawn by the magical energies being unleashed. Soon, this sanctuary would become a battlefield, and if Elin was to complete her transformation, it needed to happen before they were overwhelmed. "How long do we have?" Stig asked Fenris, whose supernatural senses could track the approaching danger. "Perhaps minutes. Bjorn has summoned more than just corpse soldiers. I smell demons, shadow beasts, things that should not exist in this world. He's tearing holes between realms," one of the spirits said urgently, using the power he's stolen to force open pathways that were meant to remain sealed. If this continues, the damage to reality itself could become irreversible. The weight of cosmic responsibility settled on Elin's shoulders like a mantle of lead. To save not just the people of this world, but the integrity of existence itself, she would have to surrender everything that made her who she was. And Stig, bound to her by the death curse, would share that price. "There has to be another way," Stig said desperately. "Some path that doesn't require complete self-sacrifice." "All magic requires sacrifice," the ancient wise woman replied. "The question is always who pays the price, and whether they pay it willingly." "Then let me pay it alone," Elin said suddenly. "The curse has been transferred to you, but the connection could be severed. You could live your natural life, find happiness, build something good with the years you have remaining." "No." Stig's voice carried absolute finality. "We've been through this. I won't abandon you to face this alone, and I won't let you make that choice for me. Even knowing what it means, even understanding that in accepting this bond, you're giving up not just life, but any chance of an afterlife." Even then, their conversation was interrupted by a sound that made even the ancient spirits recoil. Bjorn's laughter, echoing through the chamber with the resonance of a funeral bell. But the Corpse King was no longer in the room with them. His voice was coming from everywhere and nowhere, carried on winds that smelled of grave dirt and old blood. "Such touching devotion," his voice mocked, "such noble sacrifice, and so utterly pointless. Do you truly think that transforming into some cosmic guardian will give you the power to stop me? I have been planning this night for centuries, gathering power from 1,000 sources, preparing for every possible resistance." "What are you talking about?" Elin called out. "The villages I'm destroying tonight, they're not random targets, my dear. Each one sits on a point of power, a nexus where the barriers between worlds are thin. As my forces drain the life from those places, they're weakening the very fabric of reality. Soon, I won't need to steal life force to sustain myself. I'll be able to draw power directly from the chaos between worlds." The implications hit them like a physical blow. Bjorn wasn't just feeding on human life. He was systematically destroying the anchors that kept the mortal realm stable. If he succeeded, the result wouldn't be merely his continued existence, but the unraveling of everything. "We're too late," one of the spirits whispered. "By the time the transformation is complete, he'll have achieved his goal." "No," Elin said, her voice carrying sudden determination. "We're not too late, because we're not going to wait for the transformation to be complete." "What do you mean?" "I mean, we're going to trust in something more powerful than ancient magic or cosmic destiny." She turned to Stig, her eyes blazing with resolve. "We're going to trust in the choice we made to face this together, whatever the cost." The bloodstone of Magnus, which had remained hidden in Elin's belongings since their flight from the cabin, suddenly blazed to life in her pack. The red gem pulsed with a light that seemed to come from within, and as it did, they could hear a familiar voice, the spirit of Elin's father, speaking words of guidance and love from beyond death. "My daughter," the voice said, filled with pride and sorrow. "I see now what I could not see in life, that your strength was never meant to be contained by the role I tried to force you into. You are not just a Jarl's daughter or a Volva's apprentice. You are something new, something the world needs." "Father, I cannot undo the harm my choices caused, but I can offer you this, the power I held in life, freely given, no longer bound by the laws that separate the living from the dead. Take it, and use it to bridge the gap between what you are and what you must become." The bloodstone erupted in crimson light that merged with the silver radiance of the staff and the golden glow of the ancient spirits. In that moment of convergence, Elin felt the transformation beginning, not the slow, careful change that the ancient pact required, but something immediate and desperate and powered by love freely offered from both the living and the dead. "Together," she said to Stig, extending her hand. "Together," he agreed, taking it without hesitation. As their fingers interlocked around both the staff and the bloodstone, power beyond description coursed through them both. They were still themselves, still mortal, but also something more, champions equipped, not just with magical abilities, but with the unshakable conviction that some things were worth any price. Outside, Bjorn's assault on reality itself continued, but now he would face more than just a runaway bride and her protector. He would face love itself, armed and ready for war. The transformation that coursed through Elin and Stig was unlike anything the ancient spirits had witnessed in their centuries of existence. Instead of the slow, careful metamorphosis that the old rituals required, this was a fusion born of desperation and love, powered by the willing sacrifice of the dead and the unwavering determination of the living. Stig felt his ancestral sword, the blade he had carried but never named, suddenly blaze with new purpose. The meteorite iron that formed its core had been waiting for this moment. He realized, forged by his grandfather, not just as a weapon, but as a conduit for power beyond the mortal realm. The sundering blade, as knowledge flooded his mind with its true name, was designed to cut through more than flesh and bone. It could sever the magical bonds that held unnatural things together. "Can you feel them?" Elin asked, her consciousness now expanded beyond the confines of the mountain chamber. Through their shared connection, she could sense every point where Bjorn's forces were attacking, every life being drained to fuel his assault on reality itself. "All of them?" Stig confirmed. His enhanced perception showed him the scope of the horror villages burning with cold fire, families fleeing in terror as shadow beasts hunted them through the snow, ancient standing stones cracking as the power they focused was corrupted and turned to destructive purpose. They emerged from the chamber to find the settlement under full assault. Bjorn's forces had arrived in numbers that defied comprehension, not just the corpse soldiers they had seen before, but creatures torn from nightmares, demons pulled through the holes he was ripping in reality, and worst of all, the corrupted spirits of Völva who had been twisted to serve his will. The sight of the corrupted wise women hit Elin like a physical blow. These had once been healers, protectors, women who had devoted their lives to serving the balance between worlds. Now they moved with jerky, unnatural motions, their eyes blazing with stolen fire as they directed eldritch energies against the very settlement they should have been protecting. "He's been collecting them for decades," Fenris said, his form now revealed in its true magnificence, not just a wolf dog, but a creature of living starlight, the guardian spirit of an entire bloodline made manifest. Every Völva who disappeared, every wise woman who vanished without explanation, he captured their spirits and bound them to his service. "Can they be freed?" Elin asked, raising the staff as one of the corrupted spirits turned toward them. "Only by destroying the bonds that hold them," Stig replied, the sundering blade singing as he drew it. "And only if we can reach Bjorn himself." The Corpse King stood at the center of the settlement, his form now revealed in all its hideous truth. What had once been a handsome Jarl was now a walking skeleton, wrapped in rotting flesh, held together by stolen life force and malevolent will. Around him, reality itself was beginning to fray as he drew power from the destruction his forces were causing across the region. "My dear bride," Bjorn called out as they approached, his voice carrying across the battlefield despite the chaos. "How lovely you look in your new role. But you're too late to stop what I've begun. The damage is already done." "The damage can be healed," Elin replied, her voice amplified by the spirits of every Völva who had ever lived. "Evil is not permanent. Corruption can be cleansed, Can it indeed? Look around you, child. See what I have accomplished. He gestured, and suddenly they could see the full scope of his plan. The attacks on the villages were not random. They formed a pattern across the landscape, each point of destruction corresponding to an ancient site of power. As life force was drained from these places, the barriers between worlds grew thinner, allowing more of his demonic allies to cross over. But worse than that, the pattern itself was a massive ritual circle, with the Vulva settlement at its center. When enough power had been gathered, when enough life had been consumed, Bjorn would be able to tear a permanent hole between realms, making himself not just immortal, but the ruler of a domain where the laws of reality bent to his will. You see now why your transformation comes too late, he continued. Even with all your new power, you cannot undo what has already been accomplished. The pattern is nearly complete. That was when Stig understood what they had to do. The pattern, he said to Elin through their mental link. It's not just drawing power from the destruction, it's dependent on all the points remaining active. If we can sever enough of the connections, the entire working collapses, Elin finished. But that would mean traveling to each site, fighting through his forces at every location. Not necessarily. If the Sundering Blade can cut magical bonds, and if those bonds are what's maintaining the pattern, then we cut them from here, at the center. But Stig, the backlash from that much severed magic, will probably destroy us both. I know. Around them, the battle raged as the ancient spirits of the settlement fought against Bjorn's corrupted forces. Light clashed with shadow, healing magic struggled against destructive power, and the very air crackled with energies that were never meant to exist in the mortal realm. Fenris bounded toward them, his starlight form flickering as he used the last of his strength to hold back a wave of shadow beasts. Whatever you're planning, do it quickly, he called. I can feel the barriers weakening. Soon, things will start coming through that even I cannot stop. Elin raised the staff, its silver light blazing as she began to gather power. But instead of striking directly at Bjorn, she began tracing runes in the air, not the binding symbols they had seen before, but something else entirely. What are you doing? Stig asked. Creating a choice, she replied. For every soul Bjorn has enslaved, every spirit he has corrupted. Magic cannot force free will, but it can remind people that they have it. The runes she drew blazed with a light that was neither silver nor gold, but something warmer, the radiance of hope itself, spreading outward from the settlement like ripples on a pond. And wherever that light touched the corrupted spirits, they stopped their attacks and stood still, as if remembering something they had thought lost forever. Impossible, Bjorn snarled. They are mine. I own their very souls. Souls cannot be owned, Elin said simply. They can only be given freely, or taken by force. And what is taken by force can always be reclaimed. One by one, the corrupted vulva began to turn away from Bjorn's commands, their stolen fire dimming as they remembered who they had been before their enslavement. And as they did, cracks began to appear in the ritual pattern that stretched across the landscape. Now, Stig said, raising the Sundering Blade, while his power is divided, while the pattern is vulnerable, together, Elin agreed. As they moved toward Bjorn for the final confrontation, the Corpse King's expression changed from arrogant confidence to something approaching fear. For the first time in centuries, he was facing opponents who understood that some things were more important than survival. The final confrontation began not with the clash of weapons, but with a battle of wills that shook the very foundations of the mountain. Bjorn, realizing that his centuries-long plan was unraveling, abandoned all pretense of strategy and threw the full weight of his stolen power against them in a desperate attempt to complete his ritual before they could stop him. "You think your noble sacrifice means anything?" he screamed, his corpse form swelling with dark energy as he drew power from every soul he had enslaved over the centuries. "I have consumed kings and queens, heroes and saints, What are two mortals against the accumulated strength of ages? We're not just two mortals, Aelin replied, the staff blazing in her hands as she channeled not only her own power, but the willing aid of every spirit that had chosen freedom over enslavement. We're everyone who ever chose love over fear, sacrifice over selfishness, and hope over despair. The heart of winter, the ancient crystal that had long been hidden within the settlement's most sacred shrine, rose from its resting place and floated between them, its faceted surface reflecting not light, but pure possibility. This was the artifact that had drawn the first vulva to this mountain, the concentrated essence of the eternal winter that balanced the fierce summers of the north. Stig felt the crystal's power merge with his own, and suddenly he understood why his grandfather's sword had been forged from star metal. The sundering blade was designed not just to cut through magical bonds, but to channel the primal forces that governed the turning of seasons, the cycle of life and death, the eternal dance between order and chaos. "Fenris," he called to the wolf spirit, who was barely maintaining his form after the tremendous effort of holding back Bjorn's demonic allies. "Can you hold them for just a few more moments?" "I can do better than that," Fenris replied, his starlight form suddenly blazing brighter. "I can join you." The guardian spirit leaped not at Bjorn's forces, but at Stig himself, merging with the warrior in a fusion that was both shocking and inevitable. Suddenly, Stig possessed not just enhanced human abilities, but the supernatural senses and spiritual knowledge of a creature that had existed since the first covenant between mortals and the old powers. "Three become one," Aelin whispered, understanding flooding through her as the pattern completed itself. "The vulva, the warrior, and the guardian. This is what the prophecy truly meant." Bjorn's assault intensified, shadow and corruption pouring from him in waves that withered everything they touched. But where his darkness met their light, something extraordinary happened. Instead of cancelling each other out, the opposing forces began to create something new. The spaces between light and shadow filled with potential, with the raw stuff of creation itself. "The ritual pattern," Stig said, his consciousness now expanded to encompass not just his own perception, but Fenris's ancient wisdom. "We can't just break it, we have to transform it." "Transform it into what?" "Into its opposite. Instead of a pattern that draws life force for destruction, a pattern that gives life force for healing." It was a concept so audacious that even the ancient spirits paused in their struggle to consider it. To reverse a working of such magnitude would require not just breaking Bjorn's power, but redirecting it, turning centuries of accumulated death energy into a force for restoration and growth. "The price," Aelin said, her voice barely audible above the magical storm raging around them. "To channel that much power, to transform that much corruption. We'll burn out completely," Stig confirmed. "Not just death, but total dissolution. Nothing left of us to remember or mourn." "And if we fail?" "Then Bjorn wins, reality tears apart, and everything we've ever loved becomes his plaything for eternity." They looked at each other across the battlefield, their connection deeper now than mere words could express. In Aelin's eyes, Stig saw not just the woman he had fallen in love with, but every possibility for goodness that had ever existed. In his gaze, Aelin found not just the warrior who had chosen to stand beside her, but the embodiment of every choice to protect rather than destroy. "No regrets?" he asked. "None," she replied. Together, they began the working that would either save their world or destroy them in the attempt. The heart of winter blazed between them as they poured their combined power into the crystal, while the sundering blade traced patterns in the air that rewrote the very laws governing Bjorn's ritual circle. Across the landscape, the points of destruction that had fed the Corpse King's power began to change. Where villages had burned, new growth suddenly erupted from the ground. Where families had died, the spirits of the departed whispered words of comfort to the living. Where corruption had taken root, healing light blazed forth like dawn after the longest night. "Impossible!" Bjorn shrieked, his form beginning to flicker, as the sources of his power were not just severed, but transformed into forces actively opposing him. This cannot be done. The pattern cannot be reversed. The pattern was never yours to begin with, Elin said, her voice now carrying harmonics that spoke of wind through leaves and water over stone. You stole it from people who built it to protect and preserve. We're simply returning it to its original purpose. But you'll die, Bjorn said, and for a moment his voice carried something that might have been genuine confusion. You'll cease to exist entirely. Why would you choose obliteration over the immortality I offered? Because obliteration in service of love is still love, Stig replied, the sundering blade now blazing so brightly that it seemed to be made of pure starlight. And love is the only thing in any universe that truly lasts forever. With that, they completed the reversal. The heart of winter exploded in a cascade of light that washed across the entire region, carrying with it not just power, but transformation itself. Every point where Bjorn had spread corruption was cleansed, every soul he had enslaved was freed, every wound he had inflicted upon reality began to heal. And Bjorn himself, cut off from all sources of stolen power, began to crumble like ancient parchment exposed to flame. This is not the end, he whispered as his form dissolved. There will be others like me, other hungers, other darkness, and there will be others like us to stand against them, Elin said softly. That's what love does. It endures, it spreads, it creates more of itself wherever it's needed. As the last of Bjorn's essence scattered on the mountain wind, Stig and Elin felt their own forms beginning to fade. The price of the working was claiming them, but instead of fear, they felt only peace. They had chosen well. The silence that followed Bjorn's destruction was not empty, but full, pregnant with possibilities, rich with the promise of healing. As the last echoes of the great working faded across the mountain, Stig and Elin found themselves standing in a world transformed, their own forms flickering between the solid and the ethereal as the price of their sacrifice began to claim them. But something unexpected was happening. Instead of simply dissolving into nothingness, they felt themselves becoming part of something larger, not death, but transformation into a new kind of existence. The love they had chosen, the sacrifice they had made freely, had created something the ancient powers had not anticipated, a new covenant, a new balance between mortal and eternal. Look, Elin whispered, pointing toward the ruins of the settlement around them. Where broken stones had lain scattered for centuries, new structures were growing, not built by hands, but shaped by will, formed from the same light that had defeated Bjorn. The Volva settlement was rebuilding itself, drawing on the transformed energy that now flowed through the mountain like lifeblood through veins. And emerging from that light came figures they recognized, the spirits of the ancient wise women, but no longer bound to the mountain as guardians of the dead. They moved with the freedom of the living, their starlight robes replaced by simple garments that spoke of renewed purpose rather than eternal vigil. The binding is broken, the eldest spirit said, approaching them with eyes that held tears of joy. Not just Bjorn's enslavement, but our own self-imposed exile. The choice you made, the price you paid, it has freed us all to choose new paths. What happens now? Stig asked, feeling his consciousness expanding beyond the boundaries of individual existence while somehow remaining distinctly himself. Now we heal, another spirit replied. The wounds Bjorn inflicted on reality, the scars his centuries of predation left on the fabric between worlds, all of it can be mended now that the pattern has been reversed. Through their enhanced perception, they could see the healing spreading outward from the mountain like ripples on an infinite pond. Villages that had been destroyed were growing anew. Families separated by death were finding ways to communicate across the veil. Children who had never known safety were discovering what it meant to sleep without fear. The new covenant ring that formed around their joined hands was not made of any earthly metal, but of crystallized intention, the visible manifestation of their choice to bind themselves, not in death, but in service to something greater than themselves. It gleamed with a light that was neither silver nor gold, but the warm radiance of love, freely given and eternally sustained. "You're not dying," one of the ancient vulva said, wonder in her voice. "You're becoming something new, something we never thought possible." "What are we becoming?" Elin asked. "Guardians, but not bound to any single place or purpose. Teachers, but not limited to any single form of knowledge. Healers, but capable of mending more than just physical wounds." The spirit smiled. "You are becoming what love looks like when it chooses to take active form in the world." As understanding dawned, they realized that the death curse had not been defeated, but transformed. Instead of consuming them, it had become the foundation for a new kind of existence, one that allowed them to move between the realm of mortals and the domain of spirits, helping wherever they were needed, protecting those who could not protect themselves. "The villages below," Stig said, his awareness reaching out to touch the settlements that had been attacked during Bjorn's final assault. "They'll need help rebuilding, need guidance in healing from what they've endured." "Then that's where we'll start," Elin agreed. "But not as rulers or gods, as servants, as friends, as people who understand what it means to choose hope over despair." The months that followed proved that transformation, like healing, is a gradual process. Stig and Elin moved through the region like living legends, but their work was humble and practical, helping farmers replant fields that had been poisoned by dark magic, teaching children songs that would ward off nightmares, showing families how to build homes that would welcome joy and dispel sorrow. They aged, but slowly, their mortal forms sustained by the love they shared and the purpose they served. They had children not through physical birth, but by taking in orphans left by Bjorn's depredations, raising them with both practical skills and spiritual wisdom. The Volva settlement became a place of learning again, but different from what it had been before. Here, anyone could come to study, not just those born with magical gifts, but anyone who wanted to understand how to live in harmony with the forces that shaped the world. Warriors learned that true strength came from protecting rather than conquering. Farmers discovered that the earth responded better to partnership than domination. Leaders found that authority was most powerful when used to serve rather than control. Years passed, then decades. Stig's hair turned silver, then white, and laugh lines carved themselves around Elin's eyes. But the ring that bound them never dimmed, and the love that had created their unique existence never faltered. On quiet evenings, when their work was done and their adopted children were safely asleep, they would sit by the same kind of fire where they had first shared honest conversation. The cabin they lived in now was larger, more comfortable, but it held the same sense of sanctuary that Stig's original retreat had provided. "Do you ever regret it?" Elin would ask sometimes, watching the flames dance in the hearth. "Giving up a normal life, a normal death, for this?" "Never," Stig would reply, taking her hand in his and feeling the warmth of the covenant ring pulse between them. "We chose love over fear, service over selfishness. Everything good that has grown from that choice has been worth any price." And in the fire's glow, they would see reflected not just their own faces, but the faces of everyone they had helped, everyone who had been touched by their sacrifice and found the courage to make similar choices in their own lives. Love, they had learned, was not just an emotion but a force of creation, one that grew stronger with every act of generosity, every moment of courage, every choice to stand with others rather than against them. The story they had lived would be told for generations, but not as a tale of heroes who saved the world through might and magic. It would be remembered as the story of two people who discovered that the greatest power in any universe is the willingness to love someone else more than you love yourself. And in a world that had known too much darkness, that was the brightest light of all.